Here's a little ghost story called Sandy's Ghost, written by somebody anonymous, and I have my cat that I knit with me to read for Halloween. Sandy's Ghost. Accommodations for the night, stranger? Well, yes, I reckon we can fix a place for you. Have a cheer and set you down. Thank you. Don't you find this rather a lonely place? No neighbors, no nothing that I can see. How came you to settle here so far removed from other habitations? Well, perhaps it's best not to ask too many questions to once. Beg your pardon. No offense was intended, I assure you. Simply idle curiosity. Don't say another word, stranger, but come in and we'll have a snack for supper. Polly, bring on the victuals. You're just in time. Polly at once obeyed. She was a typical Western girl, tall, lithe, graceful, and limpid-eyed. She was clear-skinned and high-spirited, too, and in this case ignorant, through no fault of her own. John Barr's eyes scanned her intently, and a flush came to her cheeks. For the first time in her life, she was unpleasantly conscious of her bare feet. It may have been that this made her stumble and spill some of the contents of an earthen bowl over the guest's knees as she placed it on the table. Her eyes flashed, and a tear of anger twinkled on the lashes. She stopped, half meaning to apologize, but an oath from her father caused her to set the bowl down heavily and to hurry from the cabin. A moment later, Barr saw a flutter of pink calico from behind a pile of rocks. Old Kit Robinson saw it too. Don't wonder at your saying 'tain't right. She's a smart gal and a good looker too, as should have been sent away from here to school to be educated, but she won't leave her no-count dad. I oughter be shot for cussing her, but I ain't what I used to be. Settin' here and keepin' guard makes me nervous. Barr's eyes asked the question, his lips refused to speak. Supper eaten, the men went outside and sat with their chairs tilted back against the cabin. Something in the younger man's frank face had softened old Kit into a reminiscent mood and made him strangely inclined to gratify an idle curiosity. The soft evening winds sighed through the branches of the tall spruce pines, and the declining rays of the setting sun caused the shadow of the rude home to stretch out longer across the greensward. From its shelter, where he sat, John Barr looked out on the grand ranges of the Rockies and wondered where in their vastness he would find the man he sought, the finding of whom had brought him out into this wild and almost forsaken mining camp. Stranger, I've took a likin' to yer. Ye've a somethin' about you that reminds me of someone I know, and you look like an honest chap. Say, do you believe in ghosts? He put the question very suddenly, and a look of disappointment crossed his face when Barr told him that he did not believe in spooks. Well, I've seen 'em. A thought connecting the pink calico with something in the past came to Barr's mind. Can't you tell me about it? He asked. I'd like ter if yer swar on yer derringer never ter blab. Will you swar? The solitary guest started to smile, but the smile faded. At the thought of unshed tears in Polly's eyes, it might make it easier for her if he humored the old man. I'll swear, he said, and he did. Do you see yon old spruce and the turn of the trail, and the cliff just above? Well, there's the spot I'm watchin' and guardin' till the owner comes to claim it. I'm quick to burn powder and a pretty sure shot. I know a man when I sees him, and I ain't easily fooled. Well, ter begin with, I had a partner once, and he was a man sure enough. He was from the state of New York. I never asked him as ter how so fine a gent come to be diggin' and shovelin' in the Rockies, though to myself I said thar was some good reason. He had light hair, and we called him Sandy for short, and he was just about as gritty as sand. We was as unlike any two fellers you ever saw. He was quiet like and steady, and I was sort of wild and reckless and liked Mountain Dew moss so much. Well, When we had a little dust scraped together, we would divvy, and I took my share way down to the station on the other side of the cliffs and sent it off to bank in Helena. But I allers left some hid where the gal would find it. Old Sandy had a bank of his own that no one knew about, except in himself, and every time we divided, he'd carry part of it to his hiding place and then give the rest to me to send to his boy that he said was being educated in some college way up in Boston. He seemed to think a heap of that boy. After a while, my old woman gave out, and soon we laid her away on the hillside. It was hard, stranger. Old Kit's voice failed him for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure and continued. But when old Sandy, my good pard, give up, I didn't care for nothing. We buried him in style. All the boys from round the diggins was thar, and many an eye was wet. We didn't have nary a preacher, but the gal, she prayed at the grave. For the life of me, I don't know where she learnt it. Reckon the old woman must have told her. Next morning the gal showed me a letter that Sandy give her just afore he died. It was ter his boy, and she was to give it to him if he ever come out this way, and she's got it yet. That same evening after supper, feeling kind of glummish, and like thar were something in my throat I couldn't swaller, I took a stroll up the gulch. I went on out to the top of the edge of the big rock, and I got to studying where I'd find another part like Sandy. All ter once I felt a hand touch my shoulder, kind of light, once or twice. I jumped up, half expecting it was Sandy, but it was only the gal. Well, I was took back at first, and then I got mad. "What air you doing up here?" I asked, kind of rough. She had tears in her eyes as she looked at me and said, "Pop, don't get mad. I was lonesome. I seed you coming up this way, and I followed you, 'cause I wanted to tell you that Sandy said to give his boy his pile when he comes." "Well," says I, "you might have waited till I come back to the house." And then I sent her back. After she was gone, I saw to studying where in the world Sandy's pile was. I tried to think where he could have hid it, but it weren't no use. All ter once I noticed it was plumb dark, and as these mountains ain't a healthy place for a man to roam in arter nightfall, especially if he ain't got his shooting irons on, I cut a pretty swift gait for the shack. Just as I come round the bend, thar at the pine, I happened to look up toward the cliff, and there sot Sandy. Yes, sir, it was him, sure as you're born. My feet felt heavy as lead, and I couldn't move from the spot. I tried to holler, but it weren't no good. Finally, I gave a sudden jerk, and I made a step toward him, and as I did so, he disappeared. Then I made tracks for home, but I kept mum, 'cause I knowed the boys would say that Mountain Dew was licking up my brains, and I would be seeing snakes and such things afore long. The next night, somehow or another, I thought to go and see if he was there again, and sure enough, there he sat, looking kind of sad and making marks on the rocks with his fingers. I had my hand on my gun this time, so I got a little closer than afore, but by hooky, he got away from me again, nor did he come back. I could hardly wait for the next night to come round. At the same time, I was on hand good and early, just as it began to get dark, and as the trees looked like long spooks a stretching out their arms, I looked toward the cliff, and thar he sot, a marking and a scratching on the rock with his fingers, and still looking sad. Now, this being the third time, I kind of got bold, and I went a little closer and says, "Sandy, what's the matter with you? Didn't the boys do the planting right for you?" Then, as luck would have it, I thought of something else right quick, and I said, "Or is it the dust you have hid where you're sitting?" Well, he looked up then, and the happiest smile come to his face, and all ter once he disappeared again. And since then I have sat here and guarded the place till the right one comes along to claim it. Let's see, what did you say your name was? Pardon me, I thought I had told you. My name is John Willett Barr. Polly, oh Polly, come here, gal. What was Sandy's full name? I plumb forgot. What you want to know first? She asked. I ain't a-going to tell you now. That's my own secret. Come, come, gal, tell me ter once, or it won't be healthy for you. Well, then, she answered stubbornly, it's John Willett Barr. At her reply, the younger man's face grew deathly pale, and he started up from his chair, but Kit thrust him back into his seat, saying, Bring me the letter, Polly. What are you going to do with it, Pa? She inquired cautiously. I promised old Sandy on my oath to keep it till the right one comes along to claim it, and I mean to keep my word. The right one is here, gal, thar he sits, so trot that letter out, and don't parley with me if you know when you're well off. Polly stared at the younger man in utter bewilderment for a moment. Then, turning slowly, she stepped quietly into the cabin after the precious document. An unusual gleam of joy lighted up her face, and a suppressed excitement shone in her eyes. Under her breath she said, Somehow or other I felt he was the right one. Too truly, John Barr realized in that painful moment that he whom he sought was now dead to him, that the father from whom he had been parted so many years was sleeping that long, dreamless sleep in the clay mound on the hillside, which marked his last resting place. As he turned to look at the face of old honest Kit, who had been his father's friend during those long years of forced exile, a happy smile lit up the old miner's rugged features as he pointed with his finger to the rock cliff near the old spruce vine, and said in an exultant, trembling voice, Thar he be, stranger, just as I have seen him many a night. Your dad, my pard, poor old Sandy. With an eager voice, John Barr sprang forward, and the mountains echoed and re-echoed the plaintive cry of, Father! Father! But his outstretched arms clasped only emptiness and the darkening shadows of the rapidly approaching night.